I am so excited to be here speaking to you today. And as you see, I'm half ready for camp already. So I can't wait to talk to you guys, run through some things, and then, work with your kids and then head off to camp. So here we go. Dr. Hopkins set the stage so nicely for a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, but I have something a little bit different that we're going to do here. We are going to do MythBusters. And since Dr. Rob just set the stage, I had to put him up there as one of the MythBusters. So he and I are going to myth bust some things about being a woman with Fabry disease. Here are my disclosures. Again, Jerry always said this, but really we're kind of telling you as information for knowledge so then you can be armed to go talk to your doctor. Don't just take it off our slides and be like, this is what I'm going to do for my new treatment plan. You got to collaborate with your physicians before you do this. All right, this is how it's going to work. I'm going to say, here's the myth. The myth is that Bigfoot was spotted at Victory Junction. And then I'll say, guess what? We did some exhaustive research. Rob and I went out in the woods. We bought the binoculars and we found out it was just one of the volunteers experimenting with facial hair. So that is busted. So when you see the busted sign, I want you to say with me, busted. Good. Excellent. All right. This is our mythological elephant, because I feel like all these are questions that have been elephants in the room and in the chat rooms and on our Fabry webpage for a long time. And I want to make sure we put some of them to bed and arm you with the information you need to help other people understand why these things are not true. What's our first question? This is our biggest elephant. And in fact, just yesterday, I got to educate an urgent care physician all about why women have Fabry. That's right. But I'm going to tell you why. Well, these two guys were not the first to say there was issues with Fabry disease, but they published this amazing paper that came right out and said it in the title. Heterozygous Fabry women, heterozygous just means you've got two X's and you've got the gene change for Fabry on one of them, are not just carriers. They have a significant burden of disease and impaired quality of life. Like, you don't even have to read the paper. You read the title, you're off, you're moving. But they were one of the first who did a big comprehensive view, but there's been so many papers after. And Rob just showed you a lot of these great data, and I don't want you to read them all. I'm just telling you that every single body system up there that you see affected by Fabry disease is affected at women, and a number that's well above general population. And there's several of us in the room who are trying to get a great paper published that's going to kind of consolidate all that in one place, so then people can hand it out and they can read it and understand what these numbers mean when it comes to women having Fabry disease. The one thing I do want to point out here that I think is critical is in Spain, they did this great study and they looked at women who were not on therapy and considers themselves asymptomatic. What happened when they really looked, when they looked from head to toe? What do you think happened? They were symptomatic, weren't they? Yep. Not all of them, but 66% of them. That's well over half, you guys. So just because you feel asymptomatic doesn't know that you're not having things going on that you think are normal, but really are signs of Fabry disease impacting life. So what does this tell us? Are women just carriers of Fabry disease? Busted. Thank you. Good job. Myth number 2. If a woman has normal levels of alpha-galactosidase A enzyme in their body, they are unaffected by Fabry disease. Busted, right? Okay, why does this come about? What is the mythology behind this myth? The mythology is that women have 2 X chromosomes. These are basically genetic instructions for certain things in our body. And one of the things it has instructions for is alpha-galactosidase A enzyme, right? Which we often abbreviate as GAA. Or we call AGA. We got all sorts of nicknames for things, right? Anyway, so you got alpha-galactosidase A enzyme and you have 2 X chromosomes. And usually, in most cases, one of them has a perfectly functional GLA gene and the other has the one that's causing all the problems. But in every cell of your body, one of these cells before you're born is turning off one of your X's. And each cell can kind of do it a different way. On average, what we expect is about half of those X's are going to be turned on that has normal average levels of enzyme, and the other X is not putting out any enzyme because it has the change that we see, right? All right, that makes sense. But why in the blood do you have different levels of enzyme if you're a woman? Well, the reason you have different levels is because you've got different patches of cells. Women are like calico cats. We got like some X over here that's like an orange patch. We got some X over here that are on, and they're like a dark patch, right? So what we're looking at is that we've got different populations of cells. And just because the cells that pop up in the blood have this level of enzyme that's normal, it does not mean that you don't have Fabry disease. And there's been interesting data that shows that women who have balanced X activation, so about 50% of one X is on, about 50% of the other X is on, as far as they can tell, they still have Fabry disease manifestations. So just because you have normal enzyme in your blood, it doesn't mean you've got normal enzyme in your kidneys, or normal enzyme in your liver, or normal enzyme in your intestines. There was also a study that showed that women with alpha, when you look at their enzyme level, they were just as symptomatic as those in this one population with low or absent. So in women, alpha galactose A enzyme activity does not match how you're going to feel and how your disease is going to progress. So frustrating, right? But what does this tell us about our myth? Do women with normal alpha gal, are they unaffected by Fabry? Busted. All right, myth number 3. The diagnosis of Fabry disease, it's just the same. You can test a woman, you can test a man. It's all good, no problem. You all are like, that's right. In men, you can look at alpha galactosidase A enzyme levels. Didn't I just tell you can have normal enzyme levels and be affected by Fabry disease? I did, and you remembered it. So you know this is already busted. But in the meantime, we're going to tell you that you have to look through the gene, the GLA gene, to see if there's a change that causes disease. There are like 12 different names for this test. Sometimes it's molecular testing. Sometimes it's gene sequencing. Sometimes it's next generation gene sequencing or next gen. Bottom line is you got to read through the gene. And if that's full gene sequencing, GLA gene testing, Fabry full gene sequence, it's fine. You just have to read through the gene in whatever way that is labeled for you. It does mean that sometimes if a doctor is not familiar with genetics, genetic testing, Fabry disease, they're going to order something random, and they're going to order an enzyme, or they're going to order something else. It's okay. You can go back and order the actual test down the road. You just have to know somebody can't be ruled out if they're a woman if they just had enzyme testing. And there's a chart. There's many charts. So you can just bring a chart and be like, follow this, please. There's one of the mythology that's kind of tucked into this one is that a blood test is better than a saliva test, or a blood test is better than this test. You can, in general diagnostic testing, you only measure enzyme levels on blood. And we already talked about how enzyme is not going to fix and tell us whether a woman is diagnosed with Fabry disease or not. But you can have different samples that looks at your gene sequencing, because your cells in your saliva, in your mouth, in your blood should be approximately the same. So if you have a gene mutation that's in your saliva, and it also will be in your blood. Now, it's genetics. Nothing's 100%. But if someone has got a gene mutation found in their saliva, then most likely it's also found in their blood. If it's found in their blood, it's most likely in the saliva as well. What I'm saying is you can take a non-invasive sample and it's going to be okay. Although sometimes with any sample you send in, they don't get enough DNA. They tell you it's failed. They ask you to do something again. So sometimes people end up with blood, mostly because that's how you get the largest load of DNA without having to repeat a test. It's not because the test is better or worse. The way you know a test is better or worse is if you could test it at a reliable genetics lab who know what they're doing, right? Okay. So it's not the sample that's important, it's the way that they test it. Genetic testing can be done at any of these things. I don't recommend fine needle aspirates for testing for Fabry disease, but that is a sample you can get. So what do we think about myth number 3? Men and women diagnosed the same for Fabry? Busted. All right. Myth number 4. Women with Fabry disease are only at risk to have sons with Fabry disease. Now, right? Okay. So like back in the 70s, right? If you were a woman and you were a carrier for Fabry disease, they were all worried about you having boys. And I think that's where this mythology started, is that they're like, oh, well, we got to figure out if you're going to have a boy and he's going to have Fabry disease. Nobody ever mentioned girls, because at that point, we were still doing that busted myth we were talking about, number 1, that women didn't have Fabry disease. So we've cleared that up. So we know now that we're just looking at the pattern of inheritance. So if a woman has Fabry disease, there's a 50% chance she's going to pass on that Fabry disease gene change that causes Fabry disease. 50% chance she's not. But if you want to break it down by gender, then that half of her girls and half of her boys would theoretically be at risk to have Fabry disease. Now, you all know that it doesn't always end up with this 50% thing because every family's different. And it's really just like tossing a coin. Just the way that if you toss a coin, you're never going to get heads half the time and tails half the time. You're not going to end up with 50% boys or 50% girls if you have 2 children. You're not going to end up with 50% Fabry, 50% not Fabry when you do this too. But if we took everybody in the room and averaged it out, it'd be about 50-50. Now, you all know that we have families who have 4 affected kids and affected mom. You all know families where we've got no affected kids and mom has Fabry disease. You cannot control which genes you pass on. We can just give you the best guess. And that's where this whole 50-50 thing comes from. But we can seriously say is women with Fabry disease are at risk to have sons and daughters with Fabry disease. So this one is busted. Thank you. It's so early and you guys already have this like good busted energy. So, okay. If a woman has normal levels of GL3 and its buddy lyso-GL3, which are Fabry specific biomarkers that Dr. Rob just talked about, they don't need treatment, right? They're good. Biomarkers are just one little piece of information. We don't treat based on biomarkers. Do we look at them? Heck yeah. Do we look for patterns and trends? We do. But do we treat based on this? We do not. And that's because this is just one marker. And as we said, just because you find something in the blood or the urine doesn't necessarily match what's going on in your brain or your kidneys or your heart. So when somebody draws this beautiful dark green tube of your blood and sends it off to be tested at the lab, this is not how we're going to decide if a woman should be tested or not. In fact, many women who have significant Fabry disease have normal levels of GL3 or lyso-GL3. Lyso-GL3 is a little bit better at finding a few more women who have symptoms, and we can watch her GL3s a little bit, but it's not 100%. You can be significantly affected with Fabry disease as a woman and have perfectly normal GL3 and lyso-GL3 in blood and urine. Doesn't make sense until you think about the fact that where are those cells in your blood coming from? Where is the lyso in the blood coming from? It's a mixed population. It's not just like a pure view into your heart or a pure view into your kidney. It's a mixed group. So if you have normal GL3, should you automatically not be treated? No, it's busted. What you should do is be looked at from head to toe with your doctor who knows about Fabry disease, and they can tell you the symptoms you report, the objective things from the tests. We put it all together and then figure out with you collaboratively, is it treatment time? And as Dr. Rob just said, if you're progressing, if you've got symptoms, why wait? Okay, another myth that's been around there a long time. If women, this is kind of contributed to that first myth, right? If women have some enzyme, shouldn't their cells share with their other cells and then everything should be fine? These 2 brilliant nephrologists will tell you, at least in the kidneys, they don't. So they did all of this amazing detailed work with lovely pieces of your kidneys and found that if you have Fabry disease and you're a woman, there'll be a cell just sitting there. See that blue cell at the bottom there? Just sitting there. It's got all the enzyme in the world. Does it share with its buddy up there with all that yellow stuff, which is GL3? It does not. We're sending your cells back to kindergarten. They need to learn to share their enzyme, but right now they don't. So if you have enough enzyme in your body, it doesn't mean that your kidney cells are sharing, which also tells us there's probably other populations of cells that don't, what we call cross-correct. They can't share. And so just because women have some cells that are not affected by Fabry disease, it doesn't mean they're sharing their enzyme. So how about this one? Busted. All right, myth number 7. Women with Fabry disease all should be classified as non-classical, and they cannot have classic Fabry disease. Busted, right? So what do we usually define classic as? Well, we just heard from Dr. Rob. Onset during childhood, low enzyme, and we already talked about how for women, we just ignore the enzyme level, right? So that enzyme would be important when we're looking at the gene all by itself, because we look at genes by themselves and say, is this more of a classic mutation or pathogenic variant that causes Fabry disease, or is this a non-classic or one of these other categories, right? And then do women have these symptoms, neuropathic pain, corneal whorls, angiokeratomas? All right, let's look. Dr. Rob has already told us that there are girls who have symptoms in childhood. Well, there's our number one category for classic, right? Do some women with Fabry disease have high GL3 levels and lyso-GL3 levels? They sure do. One other piece of evidence that women can have classic Fabry disease. Then we look at the gene. Do women with Fabry disease sometimes have mutations classified as classic? Yes. And this great guy, he was a postdoc when he did this. This is the kind of picture we get from him. No pretty headshots for him. This is Martin Arends. And he showed us that when we looked at people with Fabry disease and when they start having symptoms that impact their lives, can you separate out people with classic Fabry disease who are men from those who are non-classic, women with classic and women with non-classic? And if you look at these lines, I'm just saying, like, look at the patterns, right? You can see that that's 4 different categories. That is not all women having non-classic Fabry disease, just like men with non-classic Fabry disease. This is men with classic Fabry disease, obviously different from men with non-classic Fabry disease, obviously different from women with classic disease and women with non-classic Fabry disease. So thanks, Martin. Sorry I've got such a bad picture of you. So can women have classic Fabry disease? Yes. So this is busted. Myth number 8. Women with Fabry disease don't need treatment until there's evidence of organ damage, right? And this is something that is in guidelines in other countries. Is it in this one? No, because Rob and I were on the guidelines committees. It's nice to have friends who have the same general knowledge that you do, right? Okay, so we know that the guidelines that were put out there by Ortiz et al., who is one of our buddies, who is just so knowledgeable in Fabry disease, and we all got in a room for several times and hashed out what our beliefs are for starting therapy. The bottom line is women who have no symptoms, then we need to start therapy based on what everything's going on with their family and their lives and what they're doing. And if you've got symptomatic Fabry disease, you should be treated. We also have other great data that says the earlier you start therapy, the better. If you're a man, if you're a woman, you still need to start early. And this is what we look at. Does this mean we want to treat people just willy-nilly? No, it does not. But we want to treat everybody who we know is progressing, anybody who has signs subjectively, objectively of Fabry disease. And this is not necessarily what you're going to get if you just go to someone who doesn't know Fabry disease. And that's where sometimes it's nice to have a curbside consult with Rob, because Rob likes talking to other doctors about Fabry disease. Dr. Wallace, also very skilled at telemedicine and talking to other doctors about Fabry disease. And he can show them the data and say, this is why we need to treat women early. You don't have to wait until they've got left ventricle hypertrophy. You don't have to wait till they've got massive amounts of proteinuria in their urine. Let's treat early when the first signs are there. Okay, women have to wait till end organ damage before they get treated? Busted. Myth number 9. Women with Fabry disease cannot be in treatment trials. There are limited spots, you guys, but we have some amazing trailblazing women who are in the critical studies the FDA reviewed in every single therapy that we have. Was it 1 woman? Was it 2 women? Was it 5 women? Yes, tends to be smaller amounts, because when pharmaceutical companies are putting together studies, they're trying to get the most consistent population they can get so that they can show that there's changes. Women with Fabry are complicated in the best possible way. But it means that if you want to look at change in cells and storage in cells from the kidney, they have to have evidence that there's some storage in the cells before they start looking for change, right? If you have a woman who, from that great work out at the University of Washington, only has normal cells left because all of her other kidney cells that had Fabry disease, they've already taken a hike, that's not going to be the best person for a study where you're trying to prove that this treatment is fixing their kidneys. So that's why when you're looking to be in a study, there's all these rules about who we can bring in and who we got to leave out, you know, but women do qualify, but often they're going to limit the numbers because they're going to want to have a certain set of people that they can see change in. It's not mean, it's just being practical, right? Because if they don't show change, they don't make their endpoint, it's really hard for the FDA to say, like, yeah, good job, you can move forward. It's safe and effective. In a perfect world, we would have studies with equal amounts of women and men, but because these rules we're putting together tend to be much more streamlined and focused on people who are more severe, then it's harder. But there are more studies that people are starting to look at people with more non-classic Fabry disease. And the inclusion criteria you're looking at actually means that more women would be able to fit into that criteria. So that's good news too. In the meantime, each of these studies that I'm aware of are enrolling currently adults with Fabry disease includes women. So if you want to be in a study, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and you can look at everybody that's currently enrolling and see if you meet those criteria. Now, most of these studies right now, some of them are like, oh, only if you've got kidney disease to this level, or only if you've got heart disease to this level, or you've got pain to this level. So people may not qualify, but you can always read through this site and see if it looks like you might qualify. And then you can talk to a site near you or not near you, because you can always fly to Cincinnati or Atlanta or Virginia and get tested there and see if you could possibly qualify. Just remember, clinical trials, you guys, take over your whole life and they're a pain in the butt, but you're giving your body for science. So, thank you to anybody who's in clinical trials, because you really are carrying the community for sure. So, is this myth busted? Yeah. Myth number 10. In order to understand the impact on Fabry disease in women, we always have to compare it to men with Fabry disease. How about we just compare it to what an average walking around woman should or should not be experiencing? I think that's a better way to fairly judge what's going on. Some of the data we were looking at said women with Fabry disease have worse quality of life in several different aspects than women with multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis. Do we question if people with rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis have disease? We do not. So let's go ahead and just acknowledge women have Fabry disease. And there's some quirks to how women present with Fabry disease that we can sort out related to lab tests and things like that. But we can do it. You guys, this myth is busted, right? Yeah. My last myth is that women are so complicated that we're never going to understand it and your doctors can't figure it out. So this is my last busted, because we just proved that between what Dr. Rob just told us and our myths, that we are now empowered to go out and tell some people what Fabry in women is all about. So thank you.